My name is Mike Radley. I'm the director here at City Parks, and I'm very happy to welcome you today to our celebration, our Black History celebration. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what we'll do this evening. Tonight's festivities include the opening of the impressive exhibit you see here in the lobby, on the walls and the display cases here in the City County building. By selecting a new theme each year, we're able to shine a spotlight on various aspects of life in our region and recognize local men and women who have contributed to the quality of life here in Pittsburgh. This year's exhibit theme is The Strength of Steel, a tribute to African American steelworkers in Pittsburgh. I'm sure you'll agree that there's no more appropriate tie to our city. To tell us more about this tribute to steelworkers and those who have made it possible is Mayor's Office Representative, Ms. Sante Turner.
Thank you, Director Radley. Good evening. On behalf of Mayor Luke Ravenstahl, I welcome you and thank you for your attendance at the City of Pittsburgh's annual Black History Month celebration. Every year, the Department of Parks and Recreation highlights a unique aspect of the African American experience and produces an event that the mayor is proud to support and share with the residents of this great city. This year's theme, The Strength of Steel, a tribute to African American steelworkers in Pittsburgh, is one that lives up to that tradition and will resonate with all Pittsburghers. Steel and the steel industry are synonymous with Pittsburgh. Pictures of smokestacks and mills lining our riverbanks are embedded in our minds, even now when they are graced with new housing, green spaces, and other forms of industry. The pictures of grease-smudged faces and sweat-covered brows transport us back to a time when we truly were the Steel City. Working at the mill was a way of life. Mill workers were our fathers, our brothers, our neighbors, and our friends. These individuals bravely took on some of the toughest and most dangerous jobs in the region. But as tough as it was for them, it was all the more challenging for the African American steelworker. Tonight, we pay tribute to those who endured, to those who would not let adversity stop them, and to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for the American dream, to those who just wanted to make a decent living and support their families. Tonight, we pay tribute to those who helped build this city. I ask you to encourage others to stop by the City County building in the weeks ahead to take part of this extraordinary exhibit, which showcases an aspect of an industry that is fundamental to our region. The history shared tonight is not found in many textbooks and is truly an enriching experience. On behalf of Mayor Ravenstahl, I thank Judge Livingston for sharing his personal memories, artifacts, and his wisdom with us. Thank you to Director Radley and the City Park staff for their continued hard work. And thank you to the following sponsors and supporters for making this exhibit possible: United Steelworkers, Tony Boba of Braddock Films, 96.1 KISS FM, Rivers of Steel National Heritage Area, and Penn Brewery. Thank you and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Sante. Our next speaker is the International Vice President of Human Affairs for the United Steelworkers, Mr. Fred Redmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike, and Sante, and Dwayne Ashley, and Council President Darlene Harris, and Judge Johnson. On behalf of the Steelworkers Union and our President, Leo Gerard, our District Director, John Nafazio, we are pleased to be here tonight in this celebration of people who in our organization we consider pioneers and true giants. I want to commend the city on this exhibit. This exhibit, if you walk around and you look at the photos, it does a magnificent job in telling the story of how a relatively small group of struggling workers, such as Raymond Henderson, shaped not only the African American community, but made an impact around the country in places throughout Northwest Indiana, Baltimore, Maryland, Birmingham, Alabama, where the steel industry was thriving and continued to strive in today's economy. the actions that these workers here in this region took charted a course of history. It is a chapter of American history that too few people know about, but to many of us it is a stark reminder of what life was like in African American community in this country up until the last few decades. This exhibit is also a painful reminder of the inequity of a seniority system within the steel companies, a system that left a damaging legacy of occupational segregation and denial of equal employment opportunities, a system that condemned black steel workers to a lifetime of labor in the most dangerous and the most minimal jobs with no prospect for promotions. The grievances, their appeals for fairness for many years fell on deaf ears of the companies and yes, also their union. And this was during a time when in the African American community there were strong discussions during this period of time and disagreements about how much to stir things up. You know, people were scared of losing their jobs. Some of the black workers felt that the odds was too great. The company was not interested in providing opportunities for blacks, and the union would not fight for them. But somehow they were able to find the courage because of the uncompromising belief that their demands was just. And through lawsuits, these black workers in 1974 were able to bring to the table the EEOC, the U.S. Department of Justice, 9 steel companies, and the United Steelworkers of America. And they entered into a consent decree which established goals and timetables for the hiring and promotions of minorities, specifically African Americans, women, and Latinos, especially in areas of supervision, technical, and clerical jobs and management training programs. And we would be remiss this evening if we did not recognize Tony Buba and Raymond Henderson for documenting this history through their documentary in 1996 called Struggles of Steel. And I would encourage, particularly to the young people who haven't seen this documentary, to watch it, particularly during this month, because it captures a piece of history, not just in this region, but history that is untold around the world. You see, I'm passionate about this because many of us stand on the shoulders of people like Raymond Henderson, Oliver Montgomery, Ola Kennedy, Jonathan Comer, Dwayne Cooper, and many others who not only had the courage, but these black workers had the audacity during that time to stand up and speak out. They were driven with hope, and it ended with the fulfillment of a long-held idea that they shared, an idea that they too, like their Italian brothers and sisters, their Polish brothers and sisters, their Eastern European and Jewish co-workers, that they too can achieve the promise of the American dream. They contributed to the creation of a black middle class that produced the steel, that built our bridges, our skyscrapers, and weapons that strengthen our national defense. They contributed to the stability of our communities. They paid taxes, they bought homes, they bought cars, and they educated their children. And because of their courage and their demand for justice and fairness, we are a new union today. Steel workers today white, black, Hispanic, Asian, male, female, old and young, today we're speaking in one voice for fairness. We're speaking in one voice for pay equity. Steelworkers today speak with one voice for industrial manufacturing policy to save jobs and create good manufacturing jobs. In one voice, steelworkers today is standing up together to fight against unfair trade policies that place the American worker at risk. With one voice, steelworkers are speaking up on behalf of all workers that they may be able to join a union without the threat and the intimidation of losing their jobs. So I want to say to the city, once again, we thank you because it is the work of the heroes that you see in these photographs around the wall. Because of the people that you have elected to honor this month during Black History Month, then I am proud to submit to you that because of their work and because of their dedication, the steelworkers have indeed formed a more perfect union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Redmond. Our next speaker, representing City Council, is City Council President, Ms. Darlene Harris.
Thank you for having me here today. On behalf of Council, I see Councilman Dowd over there. I see some people from Councilman Lavalle's office. Am I missing anyone? But it's an honor to speak here today. Working in the steel mills was a good, solid job that drew a lot of African Americans to the mills. But one story about one man drew me very near. Let me tell you about Oliver Montgomery, his family was the fourth generation to work in the mills. He started in 1948 in Youngstown and ended his career 30 years later at the United Steelworkers headquarters in Pittsburgh. Mr. Montgomery spent 20 years as an industrial bricklayer who worked by an open hearth. He also worked as a union activist. His career started at Jones and Laughlin Steel. In 1956, he worked nights so he could attend Youngstown State University for pre-med and psychology. Later, after moving to Pittsburgh to work at union headquarters, he took classes at Georgia Meany Labor College of the AFL-CIO to learn about economics, pensions, insurance, labor, and negotiation techniques. He also was active in the Army Reserves. He worked with Martin Luther King Jr. outside the mills and worked with the USW inside the mills. Eventually, the rules changed and African Americans were able to run for union offices and apply for any job in the mills. Mr. Montgomery soon left the mill and moved into a position with the National USW staff as a labor research analyst in economics. He led the charge to force steel companies to open their books before negotiations to be sure that the companies could afford union requests. When Mr. Montgomery retired, he was a national director of the USW's retired organization for the US and Canada. He was married. He has 5 children, 3 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Mr. Montgomery saw a lot of discrimination against African Americans and became a major player to improve civil rights. And I just wanted to tell you that story. It really impressed me. And also, not just African Americans, but women too. And I'm not new to the steelworkers. My husband worked in the Homestead Works back just after graduating from high school. Yes, I used to pick my husband up because we only had 1 vehicle, but I'd pick him up over there and wait for him outside. He wore the hip boots up to your hips, and he shoveled about 6 inches of grease that used to lay 2 foot under the water. And he put the grease in the hopper, and the crane came over and lifted it away. It had to be done at night because it was way too hot at any other time. I want to thank you for letting me be part of the city's celebration of African American history and honoring these steelworkers. And I'm glad to know and work with a lot of steelworkers and other union workers in Pittsburgh. And I wish we had our steel mills back. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Harris. Our next speaker is a gentleman that I have the pleasure of sharing a swimming pool with every so often on a morning swim, and I commend Judge Johnson for his active retirement. He doesn't seem retired to me. He's busier than most people that work. But Judge Livingston Johnson's family includes generations of steelworkers. The retired judge worked in the steel mill himself when he was a young man, and he used that job as a springboard for his further opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Livingston Johnson.
I want to thank you for the introduction, Director Radley, to our friends on the platform here, to our city officials in the audience, and to my friends who are here to help me and the city celebrate African American History Week and African Americans who have carried out the theme, The Strength of Steel. I listened with some bemusement to Fred Redmond when he was talking about the history of the steelworkers, because if I understood him correctly and remembered correctly, he lists his history as beginning around the year 1970. And I'll have to confess to you that having been born on December the 27th, 1927, you can do the math, I'm 83 years old. So my history in the steel mill at the Edgar Thompson Works began in the spring of 1944. I turned 16 years of age December the 27th, 1943, and just prior thereto, I had been trying to get a job at the Federal Enamel and Stamping Plant down in McKees Rocks, and I had planned on individually and unilaterally raising my age to 16 so I could get a job at Federal Enamel. And when I went into the office down there in McKees Rocks, the hiring agent told me that I'd have to produce several documents. One would be a birth certificate. The second would be a permission slip from my high school. and the third would be a permission slip from my parents. And I could produce the birth certificate, but that would automatically submarine my plan. And I knew my mother wasn't going to sign for me to go into the federal enamel at age 15, and I also knew that the school wouldn't support it. So I delayed going into that type of heavy work. At age 15, I continued the job I then had pumping gas at the Keating gas station at the corner of Swissvale Avenue and Penn Avenue in Wilkinsburg, and putting in coal for A.T. Palmer Coal and Ice Company. But come the spring of 1944, I was sitting in class in Wilkinsburg High School, and at the time, we had very few African Americans living in Wilkinsburg, and even fewer African Americans in the high school. And that had its disadvantages to a person of color, and it also had its advantages. I would have never gotten into Boy Scouts at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church at Rebecca Avenue and Pitt Street if I hadn't been invited to join there by one of my white classmates in 7th grade at the Horner Junior High School. And if I'd never joined Boy Scouts, then I'd have never had the chance to become an Eagle Scout, and several years ago have the class of 2003 of 310 Eagle Scouts here in Western Pennsylvania named the Livingstone M. Johnson Eagle Scout class, and I'd have never been able to have had awarded to me that same evening the Distinguished Eagle Scout Award, which is a national award presented to me by the current national president of the Boy Scouts, who at that time was our executive director of the Greater Pittsburgh Council, Bob Mazuka. So it was that just as I had had the advantage of becoming a Boy Scout because of some of my white classmates, I was sitting in class my junior year of Wilkinsburg High School, and Owen Lewis and a couple of the other fellows said that they were going out to Braddock to put in an application to work in the Edgar Thompson steel mill. And I said, oh yeah. I said, when are you doing that? And they told me, and I said, well, I'll go along with you. And I went on out there with these 4 or 5 other white classmates of mine, and I was hired to work a swing shift on the weekends. On Fridays, I'd work from 11 at night until 7 in the morning on Friday, and then I'd work 11 at night on Saturday till 7 in the morning on Sunday, and then the next week I'd work from 7 to 11 on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and then the third week I'd take the other swing shift from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. And for that, I was paid the munificent sum of 79.5 cents an hour. See, they didn't have unions back then, Mr. Redmond, or at least I didn't know of any. And we were paid 79.5 cents an hour, $6.36 a day, and those were men's wages. Men supported their families on that salary. And at that time, I stood, I guess, around about 5'7" inches tall, and I weighed about 120 pounds. And I took one of my father's old felt hats and put it on my head so I'd look a little bit older. And I went and got myself one of these leather straps to hang over my belt to hang some keys on, and I got a bunch of fake keys to put on there because I was trying to look like I deserved to be there at the steel mill. When I got there, I found that discrimination was alive and well. My first job was to be assigned to work in the soaking pits under the rolling mill. Or I worked under the soaking pits in the rolling mill. And my job, along with those that worked with me, was to take a wheelbarrow and take a heavy scoop, shovel, and take the cinders mixed with molten steel that had fallen down from the soaking pits and put it in the wheelbarrow, and then wheel that wheelbarrow a distance about the length of this first floor of the city-county building. And when we got up the other end of the area there, you'd make a left turn and take that wheelbarrow in, and they had a great big huge steel bucket that was maybe half as wide as this stage and about 5 inches in height, 5 feet in height. And you pour your wheelbarrow in there and then walk on back and load up and make that trip again. And of course, you didn't have time to rest because they had a fella that was there looking over the crew. They called him a pusher. And the pusher's job wasn't to handle any of the wheelbarrows or do any of the shoveling or do anything other than stand there and see to it that we laborers maintained the schedule that he thought was appropriate to put out the type of performance that was expected for the day. And you'd do this, and the only rest you would really get would be once that bucket got full. And it would take maybe 2 hours of back and forth with a whole crew. We had wheelbarrows just going. No sooner than you'd fill yours and start up the lane, there's another wheel going in and getting loading up and coming out. It'd take about 2 hours for maybe a crew of 3 people on a crew, maybe 20 crews to fill up that bucket. I managed to make my way out of the soaking pits, pulling the slag out of the soaking pits. I worked my way up to working in the finishing mill. And my job in the finishing mill was to try and keep up with the belt. You've seen Candid Camera on TV. Some of you are as old as I am. And you see the pies coming down the conveyor belt. Well, in the finishing mill, these slabs of steel would come down the conveyor belt. And then they'd have a great big huge steel knife that would come down and cut off the ragged end of that slab of steel. And my job was to go in there with tongs that looked like ice tongs and grab that piece that was cut off, and then you'd pivot it and swing it and drop it off into a bucket off to the side. And that was hard work because you had to keep up with the belt. But it was a whole lot easier than pushing that wheelbarrow. And it was a whole lot cleaner than breathing those gases and those fumes that were coming out from underneath the soaking pits. When I moved from the finishing mill, I moved into the masonry department. And there I found out that they had just about as many women working in the masonry department as they had us youngsters. The only people working in the mill when I worked there in 1944 were young people, too young to be drafted, 4F, those who were physically unfit to be drafted, or women. Everybody else was away in the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, serving in World War II. I worked there for the better part of a year, and it was one of the best jobs that I ever had because it not only was a job, it was an education. I found out after a year doing that it was a lot easier to get a job in construction for Navarra, working as a laborer, than it was to work in those soaking pits. I didn't tell you about putting on those wooden shoes that they have up there in that case. When they would assign us, when I was out at Edgar Thompson, you'd put those wooden shoes over your work shoes, and they would assign you to go into the soaking pits, upstairs in the rolling mill, when they're breaking down the soaking pit. And you'd have 4 minutes in and 5 minutes out. You couldn't stay in there more than 4 minutes or you'd pass out. And so you go in there, spend your 4 minutes with your equipment, digging out the old brick that was coated with steel and whatnot, breaking down those soaking pits. Then you come out for your 5 minutes and they give you these chuckle candy things. And they were loaded with salt. And when you first got them and you tasted them, you didn't want any of them. But then when you started working regularly in the steel mill and you found out that was for your own health, to replenish the salt you were losing with that sweat you were passing, you ate all those chuckles you could get, and we were permitted to go to the office and just stuff our pockets with them, get as much as we wanted. I worked in the cubulos and the open hearth at U.S. Steel, Edgar Thompson Works. And it was one of the best experiences that you could have. The 79.5 cents an hour, $6.36 a day, worked out to $31.80 for a 3-day period. And they paid us in cash in little white envelopes at the end of each week. And when I got my money, I came home. I had instructions from my father. His picture's over there on the wall. His instructions were, don't you open that pay envelope. It better not be open when you bring it home. Your mother will open the pay envelope. And he told my mother, said, Irene, when he passes you that envelope, you're going to take 1/3 of it for doing his laundry, cooking his meals, and giving him a place to sleep. He said, in Livingstone, 1/3 of it you'll put in the bank for that rainy day when you need it. He says, and the other third you can go ahead and throw it away if you want, play a fool. He says, but I'm here to tell you you'll be a fool if you do. If you're wise, you'll put that third in the bank. He said, don't tell me that you had to open the pay envelope to use it for streetcar fare coming home, because you'll know when you go to the mill that you'll have streetcar fare, and if you don't, you ask me and I'm going to advance it to you and you're going to pay me back once the envelope's open by your mother. That was some of the training. I've already spoke more than the 5 minutes that Mike allotted me, so I'll take 2 minutes. I'll take 2 minutes to tell you that display on the far wall there that's a historical display of members of our family, and my brother, Judge Justin Johnson, is standing there in the trench coat in front of the display. He might, if he would, verify that what I've told you is accurate. As to the display, my daughter, whose picture's on the far right, that's the oldest of my 5 children. She's a full-grown woman now, has 2 children of her own. She's a lawyer by profession and training, but she's presently a full-time mother taking care of her 2 children. Her husband happens to be a lawyer, and his full-time job is to do the law work, and hers is to rear those children. But she put those things together and set them up here to Director Radley and his assistant, Mr. Cates. And that's a historical rendition that my daughter prepared based upon her work. She's our family historian, and she's done many thousands of hours in compiling information on our background. I'm sorry that I took up more time than I was allotted. I'm honored to have been asked to be here. I compliment the city of Pittsburgh on its forward thinking in bringing about a program such as this. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Judge Johnson. I want to thank you all for participating in the festivities, especially thanks to Council President Harris, Mr. Redmond, and Judge Johnson. And I'd also like to thank the City Park staff who make this program possible every year. The special event staff do an awesome job. too many to name individually, but they really put their best foot forward on this program. Again, to thank our sponsors, United Steelworkers, 96.1, KISS FM, and the River of Steel National Heritage Area, Penn Brewery, and Tony Buba of Braddock Films. I encourage you all to spread the word to your family, friends, and coworkers to view this exhibit. And this exhibit will be up through the month of February. And for tonight's festivities, I'd like to conclude by inviting you all to stick around with us, enjoy some light refreshments, and again, thank you all for coming.